So to get started, I'll provide an overview of what case study interviews are like and some best practices for success. So case interviews require candidates to structure and convey a cohesive answer with the expectation of an end-to-end analytic solution architected usually on the spot, right? And this is usually conceptual. We're not jumping into coding. It's more about your thought process. Case interviews can come in a variety of different flavors. They might focus more on product scenarios or a different domain, depending on the role, or they might take more of an analytics, more of a technical data science kind of perspective. The hardest aspect is usually structuring answers appropriately and balancing depth versus coverage. I would suggest having a general framework in mind before you get started, and then being flexible as needed based on what you hear from the interviewer. And I'll share an example framework that you might use in your interviews. And I would also suggest that you pause to check in with the interviewer throughout the interview to gauge alignment, right? So you might propose a general direction for your answer, but before you jump into the details, you check with the interviewer and make sure that that's aligned with what they want to hear. Okay, so some common categories of questions would include a new product launch scenario, right? So how would you support a 0 to 1 kind of scenario where you have to consider preemptive metrics, experimentation, and really just gathering signal before there's anything live to users? Or it might be more of a scaling scenario, right? So 1 to 100 kind of approach where we have a minimum viable product. We have initial signs of product market fit for a product perhaps, but now we have to scale this, right? So how would we use product expertise and obviously analytics methodologies to help the scaling stage of a product? It might be an underperformance scenario, right? So perhaps something was working well before and then there was a change. And so we have to understand what happened. And this becomes more of a root cause kind of scenario. Or what's common too is measurement and attribution kind of questions, where often we want to understand the trend at play, but it can be very difficult to go beyond just general correlations. So we have to use perhaps causal inference methods or other creative approaches to understand the relationship between different variables. Now, I'll cover a few non-exhaustive things to keep in mind that will help to improve your answer. First of all, make sure to clarify the problem space in addition to the solution space, right? A lot of times people jump straight into solution mode, especially when they're a little bit nervous and anxious, but make sure to really clarify what is the issue at play? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the overarching objective? And then move more into the solution space in a more informed way. Anchor in company mission and strategy, right? No one's going to criticize you for talking about the mission, or at least briefly mentioning it as it pertains to the case. Perhaps you show some alignment with how you relate to the company mission or general direction or strategy. Use a structured approach, right? Rule of 3 works well. And I'll go more into this in a suggested framework upfront that you might use in your interviews. Emphasize collaboration in alignment with cross-functional stakeholders, right? This is a really easy way to get bonus points just by talking about how you would collaborate with others closely. Balance coverage and depth. Again, I'll go more into this later on. And then make sure to convey not only the technical procedures that you would use, but especially if you're in a more senior kind of role, make sure to frame a holistic business perspective as well. And then lastly, avoid generic metrics. So you might be wondering, how can I prepare for an upcoming interview, right? We can't really know what question we will be asked, so it can be hard to prepare. But I would suggest using a framework that you lean on and you can be flexible as needed. An approach you might use would be to start with the intro section, which is about 15% of your time. And here you clarify the context and intent of the question, right? So you ask some clarifying questions. You don't usually get a lot of additional information from the interviewer, but it shows how you're thinking about the problem, right? So you can clarify the objective. What are we trying to accomplish? You might clarify ambiguous points in the question, such as words like impact or engagement that sound like they're clear, but really they're quite generic. What's been done so far, right? So if it makes sense for the case, you might ask about prior efforts to address the problem, or was the A/B test launched, and so forth. If it's a product case, it's a really good idea to ask a little bit about the user experience. What are the different stages that someone will go through to use the feature? And then go into setting the stage. This is also about 15% of your time. And this is really where you frame your ideas before you jump into specific details. So you might share a few thoughts about company mission and general strategy or direction of the company. You don't have to spend a lot of time here, but it's a really good idea to show that you're thinking about the big picture before you jump into the details of the case. Here, you also want to define what success looks like, right? So for the product or for whatever the case is asking about, we'll probably have to define success metrics as well as guardrails and supporting metrics that will really capture what success means in this case. And then it's important that you convey a cohesive roadmap up front before you jump into the details. Give the structure that you'll use up front as a way to align with the interviewer and be structured before you might get lost in the details later on. Okay, now we can move on to the problem space, which is 30% of the time. And a good idea would be to start with hypotheses, right? So here you might categorize in terms of product hypotheses. What is a user experience like? What are they experiencing when they use a product? It might take more of a business angle. So perhaps a change in the macroeconomic environment, or competitors launch similar features and so forth. Or it might be more of a technical type of hypothesis about something that changed or something that was broken in the technical stack. Okay, then you can go into specifics as it relates to the case about root cause analysis, or going into product specific elements of what a user experiences when they're trying to use a new feature. But this is really where you want to share a little bit more details about your thought process. And then jump into the solution space, right? This is also about 30% of your time. And this is really where you share ideas about what we might do to address the problem at hand, right? So here, convey potential solutions. And this might range from new product features that we might build, or analytics methodologies that we might employ, such as prediction for identifying inauthentic behavior, or whatever the problem is for the case at hand. Really important that you go back to measurement and success criteria that you defined up front as a way to be objective about what success means. Lastly, wrap up with synthesis and next steps, about 10% of your time here, where you might state any assumptions and limitations of your answer. You might summarize the main takeaways of what you're proposing, and you motivate how you would collaborate with others.
Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please subscribe. Our website is prepfully.com. We've got lots of interview questions there. You can also schedule a mock interview with one of our experts. You can find the link in the description below. All the best from us at Prepfully, and we hope you totally rock your interview.